Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're diving into someone who might not be a household name in philosophy, but was a really, really important figure. Marsilio Ficino, think Renaissance.
Yeah, Ficino.
Yeah.
Real Renaissance man, right? I mean, not quite in the Da Vinci sense, but when it comes to ideas, he was all over the place. Synthesizing, that's the word for him.
Synthesizing, yeah. Pulling together all these threads, ancient Greek philosophy, religious thought, that Renaissance humanism vibe. And what's kind of cool, at least for this deep dive, is that there isn't that one, the book by Ficino that everyone knows.
Right. He's not like Descartes with the Meditations or something. But that makes him even more interesting, I think, especially for folks who, like the history of philosophy, seeing how things connect, like, boom, antiquity to Renaissance.
Totally. And we'll see this as we go, but Ficino was reading, engaging with everyone, Plato, obviously, but also Aristotle, the Stoics, even Epicureans, a whole bunch of medieval thinkers, too. I mean, the guy was a sponge for ideas.
He was. Okay, so to kick things off, life and times. Born 1433 near Florence, his dad, physician to Cosimo de' Medici. So pretty well connected from the get-go.
So already in those Medici circles. Must have opened some doors for sure. Early education, we know he learned Latin. And knowing his dad, I bet there was some medical theory floating around too.
Probably, yeah. Though his real passion, philosophy, kind of takes center stage in the 1450s. He starts writing all these letters, engaging with, pretty much everyone. Platonists, Aristotelians, Stoics. He even gave the Epicureans some thought, which is interesting. Not many people were doing that at the time.
Here's what I find fascinating, especially from a philosopher's point of view. Ficino, he didn't see philosophy and its history as separate things. For him, engaging with all these past thinkers wasn't just history. It was doing philosophy itself.
Right. And he definitely considered himself a Platonist, but not in a stuck in the past kind of way. He was pushing things forward too.
So true. He saw himself as part of this long chain of wisdom. Went all the way back to who he called the Prisci Theologi, these ancient theologians. They had the real deal, divine wisdom, according to Ficino. And his goal wasn't just to get Plato right historically, but to add to this whole tradition, contribute.
Exactly. And that brings us to his, often called the Platonic Academy. Now, picture this. When we say academy, we think, buildings, courses, professors. But Ficino's, not quite.
Yeah, not the typical university setup. Though Cosimo de' Medici, he's a big part of this, right? A serious patron. Ficino and Florence, they become, kind of the place for this Platonic revival.
Yeah, and Cosimo, he's putting his money where his mouth is, gave Ficino property in Careggi, this is around 1463, and even earlier, a house in Florence, 1462. The rental income from that really helped Ficino financially, give him time to do his thing. And Ficino himself, in a letter to Cosimo, he talks about the academy you arranged for us.
Okay, so more like an intellectual circle than a straight-up university. I mean, Ficino was teaching the elite youth of Florence, but he was doing it through these, Socratic-style dialogues with everyone hanging around, real personal, hands-on philosophy.
Yeah, that's the vibe. And you can see it in his letters, like this one from 1491 to Martin Preninger. He talks about what a friend is, and it's super platonic, a blend of brains and good character. He even categorized people. He had patrons and these familiar friends, the folks he really talked philosophy with.
I was just going to say, big names there. Leon Battista Alberti, Angelo Poliziano, Pico della Mirandola. These are the Renaissance rock stars.
They are. And then you had the students. But the point is, Ficino, he believed in this Socratic method, drawing out knowledge through dialogue rather than just lecturing at people.
He did do some more formal teaching, though. We know he lectured on Plato's Philebus. There was a stint at the Florentine studio, which is basically their university. Plus, he did private tutoring. And remember that time, in 1474, he's got all these well-born youths giving speeches, urging Italy to fight the Turks.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was definitely plugged into the scene, intellectually, politically, you name it. But you're right, that academy, it was more a way of thinking, how you approach ideas, build a community. And something to keep in mind, it was a pretty common view back then, late antiquity, Middle Ages, that before you get to Plato, you got to start with Aristotle, lay the groundwork.
That's really interesting. He saw them as working together, not as rivals. Okay, so Ficino's in this influential circle surrounded by brilliant minds, and he's got this view of philosophy as a living tradition. But what was he actually writing? What did he produce?
Well, he was pretty prolific, actually. Translations, commentaries, original works. Early on, late 1450s, it's mostly shorter pieces, letters, tackling those big philosophical questions. But the 1460s, that's when things shift. He really becomes the translator of Plato.
And it's super telling, right? In 1464, Cosimo de' Medici. On his deathbed, Ficino's there, reading aloud from his new translations of Plato. It's like, even at the very end, they believed this stuff mattered.
Yeah, absolutely. And those translations, they were huge E. He did the entire works of Plato in Latin, published in 1484. Later on, he did Plotinus too, the Ennies. That alone, making those texts available to the West, that's a massive impact.
It really is. And he wasn't just going for a word-for-word thing. Ficino believed that Plato, he had these truths that needed to be, like, unpacked, made relevant for his time. But probably his most famous work, if he has one, is The Platonic Theology, 1482. The subtitle is On the Immortality of Souls, which tells you a lot about what he was grappling with.
For sure. I mean, you can sense that there was this, like, skepticism towards religion in the air. Ficino saw Plato as almost a weapon to argue for the soul's immortality, to show that Plato and Christianity, they weren't at odds.
Like a peace treaty between philosophy and religion, he felt they were drifting apart, and he was going to bridge that gap.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And the Platonic theology, he saw it as this massive storehouse of wisdom, kind of like Proclus's Platonic theology, which Ficino loved, but with this Christian spin. And he's writing for everyone, the people into classic Latin literature, the Aristotelians, even those who are just super devout, no philosophy needed. He's not doing systematic philosophy in the modern sense. It's more like he's showing that at their core, all these traditions, they agree on the big things.
And a big part of that is his idea of an ancient theology, right? This idea that before Plato, there was this whole lineage of divinely inspired wisdom.
Exactly. Ficino's saying, you got Hermes Trismegistus, though we know now those writings weren't as old as he thought, Orpheus, Pythagoras, Zoroaster, they're all part of this one tradition, passing down divine wisdom. And Plato, he's like the culmination. So basically, philosophy, it's got this divine pedigree. In the end, it's serving theology.
He's building this whole intellectual family tree with Plato at the top, gives his project authority, and ties it into religion. Okay, so within all this, what were some of the core ideas? Let's talk ontology. How did he see reality, the structure of things?
Well, Plotinus, he's a huge influence here. Ficino buys into this hierarchical view of the cosmos. There are different versions, but a common one is 5 levels. God's at the top, then you have an angelic mind, then rational soul, that's us, then quality, which is kind of like the link between soul and matter, and at the very bottom you got matter itself. The key takeaway is that we're connected to the spiritual, but we're also stuck down here in the material world.
It's like that great chain of being idea, right? Everything's connected, and perfection kind of flows down from God.
Spot on. And just like Plotinus, Ficino's big on this idea that the soul descends into the material world, but through philosophy, contemplation, spiritual stuff, it can climb back up to God. Oh, and he also believed in sympathies, these hidden connections between everything in the hierarchy. It's all one big web.
And at the center of this, the human soul. What were Ficino's main ideas on that? We're talking psychology here.
The soul's immortality, that's huge EE for Ficino. It's front and center in the Platonic theology. He says we've got this natural appetite, this longing for God, our source. And without immortality, that longing, it just makes human life pointless and miserable.
Yeah, if we crave something eternal and it turns out we're just temporary, that's not a good feeling. But he wasn't totally on board with all the classic Platonist ideas about the soul, right? Like reincarnation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he had to do some fancy footwork there. The idea that souls get reborn, maybe even as animals, that clashed big time with Christianity. So Ficino has to reinterpret Plato. Sometimes he says, oh, those parts, they're just allegory foreshadowing Christian resurrection, or they're about the soul returning to the one, but metaphorically. He even blames the whole reincarnation thing on Pythagoras, tries to distance Plato from it. He's really threading a needle there.
Clever. And his view of the soul, it wasn't like Descartes later on, not this totally separate mind stuff.
Right. It's not that radical mind-body split Descartes had with the res cogitans and res extensa. For Ficino, the soul, even the world soul, they're more active in the material world. There's this back and forth, a lot more interaction.
Which leads us to ethics and love, right? Ficino saw love as this fundamental force that connects everything.
Definitely. Love, it comes from God and binds the whole cosmos together. This is where his idea of spiritus comes in. It's this almost magical stuff that bridges soul and body so the immaterial can act on the physical, he even said. Like when people love each other, it's their spiritus connecting.
And he's got this very Platonic view of love, right? Earthly love is a desire for beauty, and the goal is to enjoy that beauty. But it's not superficial. It's about this longing for God, who is reflected in beautiful things.
Exactly. Beauty's like a lure. It pulls you up towards divine perfection.
Yeah.
True love for Ficino, it's about that upward climb away from just physical attraction towards something higher, ultimately God.
And this is why he was so into education, doing it right. He was wary of like teaching young people dialectic logic before they had their morals straight.
Totally. He knew that if you're not careful, all that reasoning, it can lead to pride, indulgence, even impiety. You got to build character first, then you can dive into the intellectual stuff. So, okay, what's his legacy? He dies in 1499, but his ideas, they stick around big time.
His translations of Plato and Plotinus, they were the standard for centuries. People were learning from those for like 300 years. That's a huge influence on how people understood those key texts.
Massive influence. And his ideas about love, they pop up all over 16th century literature, shaped how people wrote about Platonic love.
And he's really pushing this idea of a perennial philosophy, that there's a core truth running through all these different philosophies, even religions.
Yeah, he doesn't use the term perennial philosophy exactly, but his whole ancient theology thing, that's the seed of the idea. And Platonism itself, it really takes hold in universities in the late 1500s. Ficino helped pave the way for that.
Though it is interesting that his star kind of fades a bit later on as modern science and rationalistic philosophy come on the scene. They weren't big fans of all that reliance on ancient authorities.
Right. In the 17th and 18th centuries, they wanted systems, clear rules, not Ficino's more like interpretive style. But you can't deny he was crucial. Preserving Plato and Plotinus, opening people's minds to religious history, emphasizing teaching and community.
So wrapping up, Ficino, he's this key figure bridging ancient wisdom and the Renaissance. And his thought, it can be complex, but there are these aha moments where you see how he's weaving together all these threads.
Absolutely. For philosophers today, diving into Ficino is a chance to see the history of ideas in action, how different schools can be combined, how philosophy and theology have danced around each other for centuries.
And it makes you think. He was trying to find harmony between all these traditions. What can we learn from that today when there's so much intellectual and cultural diversity? It's a question worth pondering. Well, that's our deep dive into Ficino. Thanks for joining us.